We weren't afraid of dying. We were afraid of hearing it again.
June 1943, northern France. The sky was bruised with smoke and thunder, a storm that carried not rain but metal. Farmers abandoned their fields as the distant hum of engines began to rise, first a whisper, then a roar that made the earth tremble. The western horizon glowed faintly red, and every man who looked toward it felt the same chill. The storm from America had arrived. At the Luftwaffe base near Abbeville, Captain Heinrich Faulkner stood beside his Messerschmitt Bf 109, cigarette trembling between his fingers. He had heard reports from the channel of a new Allied fighter unlike anything before. Thunderbolt, someone had called it, though few believed it could match the German designs that had ruled Europe's skies since 1939. But this morning, even the veterans spoke quietly. The first signs came not from sight, but from sound. A deep, rolling growl that grew heavier with every second. It wasn't the sharp, mechanical whine of a Daimler-Benz engine, it was deeper, primal, as if the air itself was being torn apart. The ground crew froze. The sound seemed to crawl inside their chests, vibrating bones, shaking tools on the workbench. Then they saw them silver shapes glinting against the dawn. Dozens of them, flying in loose formation, sunlight flashing on their wings. They weren't fast, at least not at first glance. They looked too heavy, too broad, almost clumsy. Yet there was something terrifying in that weight, a confidence in every movement, as if nothing in the sky could stop them. Faulkner threw his cigarette aside and climbed into the cockpit. "Start engines," he shouted. His mechanic barely heard him over the thunder rolling from above. The propellers of his 109 screamed to life, high-pitched and desperate, a sound of defiance against the deep, steady heartbeat in the clouds. As the German fighters lifted off, the difference became clear. The P-47 seconds were already climbing higher, engines booming like distant artillery. Faulkner banked sharply, sun flashing off his canopy. For a brief second, he locked eyes with one of the Thunderbolts, a stubby, armoured beast with a nose like a hammer and wings bristling with guns. The American pilot didn't manoeuvre. He didn't need to. He simply opened fire. The air erupted in Thunder 8, 50-caliber machine guns unleashing a torrent of fire that split the sky into ribbons of light. Faulkner dove, the rounds slicing past his tail, tearing holes through the clouds. He'd fought Spitfires, Hurricanes, even Mustangs, but never had he felt this kind of pressure, this relentless wall of sound and metal. Below, villagers ran for cover as streaks of smoke cut across the sky. One P-47 banked hard, diving after a fleeing Messerschmitt. The roar of its engine echoed off the valley walls, followed by a blossom of flame as the German fighter broke apart mid-air. The wreck tumbled into a field, scattering earth and fire. Faulkner pulled out of his dive, gasping, hands slick with sweat. The roar still followed him, not fading at all. It was everywhere. Above him, below him, around him. The storm had a voice now, and it was American. That day, the Luftwaffe pilots learned a new kind of fear. Not the fear of bombs, nor of defeat, but of a sound they couldn't outrun. A sound that would haunt their sleep long after the skies had fallen silent. The roar of the Thunderbolt, the storm from the west. Before the Thunderbolt came, the sky belonged to Germany. By 1940, the Luftwaffe ruled Europe's air with mathematical precision and deadly grace. Its pilots Die Adler, the Eagles, were legends. They wore silk scarves, smoked French cigarettes, and spoke of aerial combat like it was an art form. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was their brush. The sky, their canvas. Everywhere they went, they conquered. Poland, Norway, France. The Battle of Britain might have slowed them, but it had not broken their pride. Even in defeat, they told themselves, the British had survived only by luck, by weather, by radar, by the Channel's distance. The Reich still believed in its supremacy. By 1943, that belief was ironclad. Their pilots had thousands of kills between them, their aircraft refined by years of combat. When American bombers first appeared over occupied France, the Luftwaffe was confident. The B-17 seconds were massive and slow, easy prey for the swift claws of the Luftwaffe 190 and Bf 109. Inside a Luftwaffe officers' club in Amiens, laughter echoed against walls lined with trophies, pieces of Allied aircraft, scorched propellers, fragments of Spitfires mounted like hunting prizes. A gramophone played Marlene Dietrich's voice, soft and nostalgic, while young officers in leather jackets toasted with cognac. "We are the masters of the air," said Hauptmann Erich Voss, a 26-year-old ace with 42 confirmed kills. "The Americans will be no different." He smiled, confident, the way a wolf does before realizing the forest has changed. Voss had survived since the Spanish Civil War. He had outflown Hurricanes, Spitfires, and Soviet Yaks. He believed in engineering, the precision of German mechanics, the elegance of Luftwaffe tactics. His flight manual was gospel: altitude, discipline, formation, and above all, faith in the superiority of the German machine. The propaganda reinforced it. Newspapers printed photographs of Luftwaffe aces shaking hands with Goering himself. Posters shouted, "One German pilot equals 10 of the enemy." Even as the Allies grew stronger, the myth of invincibility persisted. Every morning, before takeoff, the ground crew saluted. The mechanics treated their planes like sacred relics, polishing the canopies, checking the engines, whispering nicknames as if to living beasts. The roar of the Daimler-Benz engine was music, a symphony of control, of mastery, of order. To the Luftwaffe, the Americans were clumsy giants. Their planes were overweight, overbuilt, and inelegant. "Flying refrigerators," one pilot joked. "They may have numbers, but they have no soul." But beneath that laughter was exhaustion. Fuel was scarcer. Replacement pilots were younger boys with trembling hands, rushed through training. Each month, the Allied raids grew larger. Each week, another veteran failed to return. Voss ignored the unease. Pride was his armor. He told himself that no foreign machine could ever outfly him, that skill and tradition would always triumph over brute strength. Then came the reports. New aircraft sighted near the Channel, fast, armored, brutally loud. Pilots claimed they had engaged and failed to bring them down. The gunfire from these new enemies tore through even the Luftwaffe 190's thickest plates. The name was whispered in confusion: Thunderbolt. Voss dismissed it as exaggeration. "Every new enemy seems invincible until he burns," he said. But something in the younger pilot's eyes unsettled him. They spoke not of bombs, not of dogfights, but of the sound. "Herr Hauptmann," one said quietly, "you don't hear them coming until it's too late. And when you do, it's like the sky itself is angry." Voss waved him off, pouring another drink. "Then we'll teach the sky who rules it." That night, thunder rolled over Amiens, distant, steady, like engines in the dark. No one in the officers' club noticed. By morning, the storm would have a name. It arrived not with grace, but with power. When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first roared into European skies, even the Americans who flew it called it a brute. It was enormous, almost twice the size of a Spitfire, heavier than most bombers from just a few years earlier. Mechanics joked that it could crush a hangar floor if parked too long in one spot. And yet, this flying fortress was about to change the rules of air combat forever. The Germans mocked it at first. "A cow with wings," one ace sneered. "It will never turn, never climb, never fight." But when they heard the sound, that deep, thunderous growl of the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp, the laughter stopped. The R-2800 was a masterpiece of American industrial muscle. An 18-cylinder radial engine, air-cooled, capable of pushing 2,000 horsepower. It didn't purr like the German Daimler-Benz. It bellowed, every piston fired like a cannon. At full throttle, the propeller tips broke the sound barrier, creating a banshee wail that carried for miles. To the men on the ground, it sounded like the sky tearing open. To Luftwaffe pilots, it sounded like doom. The Thunderbolt wasn't built for elegance, it was built to survive. Its fuselage was a cylinder of armor plating wrapped around a steel spine. The cockpit sat high, giving pilots a panoramic view of the world below. 8. Browning. 50 caliber machine guns lined its wings, 4 on each side, capable of spitting over 3,400 rounds in less than 30 seconds. The P-47 didn't just shoot, it erased, and it could take punishment like nothing before. Pilots told stories of returning to base with wings shredded, oil leaking, even cylinders blown apart, and yet the Thunderbolt still brought them home. Engineers called it over-engineered, pilots called it immortal. The first time the 56th Fighter Group took their Thunderbolts into combat, even their own allies were astonished. "You look like flying tanks," one RAF officer said. The Americans grinned, they liked that. Their mission? To escort bombers deep into occupied Europe. The Luftwaffe had ruled those skies for years, confident that any Allied plane venturing too far would be slaughtered. But now, the Thunderbolt was coming with longer range, self-sealing fuel tanks, and raw, unrelenting power. Captain Robert S. Johnson, one of the first to fly the P-47 inches combat, remembered his first encounter with the enemy. "They came at us 4 Fokker-Wulfs in a dive. I pulled up hard, expecting to stall. But she climbed, my God, she climbed like a rocket. They overshot. And when I leveled out, I was already behind them." That was the moment Allied pilots realized. This wasn't a heavy plane pretending to fight. It was a weapon disguised as a beast. From high altitude, the Thunderbolt could dive at over 500 miles per hour faster than any German fighter could follow. The thick wings and robust airframe handled speeds that would rip other aircraft apart. Even its nickname, Jug, was born from its shape short for juggernaut, a fitting name for something that simply crushed through the air. On the ground, factory workers in New York and Connecticut worked around the clock, assembling these machines by the thousands. Sparks rained from welders, engines thundered in test bays, and the smell of oil and metal filled the air. America had turned its factories into forges, and from those forges came thunder. Across the Atlantic, Luftwaffe intelligence reports grew nervous. They described a new American interceptor unusually fast in a dive, unusually strong, unusually loud. The analysts didn't understand how something so large could maneuver like a fighter. "Impossible," one officer wrote in disbelief. But impossible was already flying over France. As the P-47 squadrons spread across England, the locals grew used to the sound. The rumble began each morning, a deep, rhythmic pulse that rolled across the countryside like distant thunder. Farmers paused their work, children covered their ears, and soldiers looked up instinctively. They didn't yet know it, but that sound was the prelude to liberation. Back at Abbeville, Captain Heinrich Faulkner heard it too. The same noise that had haunted his dreams since the last encounter. Only now, it was closer, constant. Day after day, the sky trembled with that mechanical roar. He watched contrails weaving across the morning sky and realized the balance of power had shifted. The Luftwaffe once ruled through precision and fear. The Americans ruled through volume of planes, of bullets, of power. For the first time, Faulkner understood that the enemy wasn't just a new airplane. It was a new kind of war, a war fought not by men, but by machines. And above the clouds, the Thunderbolt's engine howled the sound of a storm born in factories, carried by courage, and destined to shatter empires. The era of the Eagle was ending. The Age of Thunder had begun. At dawn, the mist over northern France hung low and silent. The world seemed frozen in breath, the kind of stillness that comes just before something unforgettable. In a small Luftwaffe airfield near Amiens, Captain Eric Voss stood beside his Foe 190, sipping bitter coffee, unaware that this would be the last morning he ever felt certain of victory. He had heard rumors for weeks, whispers of a new American fighter, the one that sounds like thunder. He dismissed them as hysteria. War bred stories, and fear loved to exaggerate. But as he watched the horizon, he noticed the birds. They had stopped flying. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Then came the sound. It began as a hum, deep, distant, almost natural, until it grew into something alive. It didn't wail or whistle like the Messerschmitt. It rolled, heavy and thick, crawling under the skin. Every second, it deepened, a metallic growl swelling through the fog, shaking the coffee in his cup. His mechanic froze. Herr Hauptmann, das ist kein Bomber. Captain, that's no bomber. Voss turned toward the sound. A shadow broke through the mist, then another, then 5 more. The formation flew low, the sunlight catching on silver wings. They were enormous, and that sound, that impossible sound, grew louder until it swallowed everything else. It wasn't a sound you heard, a surviving German pilot recalled years later. It was a sound you felt. Your chest vibrated, your teeth buzzed. It crawled into your bones. The P-47 seconds came out of the clouds like beasts emerging from myth-round noses gleaming, wings heavy with death. Their engines thundered with a rhythm unlike anything the Luftwaffe had faced. It was not chaos, it was certainty. Voss's radio crackled. Unidentified aircraft approaching from the west. Multiple, low altitude, engage immediately. He threw down his cup and climbed into the cockpit. The Daimler-Benz engine whined to life, precise, sharp, disciplined, the sound of German engineering perfection. But even as he taxied down the runway, the roar outside drowned it completely. He had spent years mastering every tone of his own machine, the hiss, the hum, the vibration of power under control. But now, for the first time, the air itself seemed to belong to someone else. "Thunderbolts!" someone shouted over the radio. "They're Thunderbolts!" The name spread like fire through the channel. Donnerbolts. The Americans had named their plane after the gods, and it felt justified. As Voss lifted off, the full force of the R-2800 engines hit him. The sound was everywhere, not from a single direction, but from the sky itself. It wasn't just volume, it was density. It pressed against the canopy, filled his helmet, turned the air into a living wall of vibration. His wingman, Dieter, screamed through the intercom. "I can't hear my own engine." "Stay in formation." Voss barked back, though his voice was swallowed by the thunder. Above the fields, the battle began. The P-47 seconds dove out of the sun, guns blazing, tracers cutting golden arcs through the morning haze. The German flak opened up, black bursts painting the clouds, but the Americans didn't break. They plunged through the explosions, their engines roaring louder than the shells themselves. For the first time, the Luftwaffe's discipline faltered. The roar destroyed rhythm. Pilots couldn't hear orders, couldn't hear their own engines, couldn't even think. "The sound, it made you panic before you were even under fire," said another veteran decades later. You felt small, helpless, like fighting a storm. Voss tried to climb above the chaos, but the Thunderbolt followed fast, impossibly fast for its size. He banked hard, sweat running down his neck. The roar stayed with him, inside his skull. Then came the gunfire. 8 Brownings tore through the air. The sound was less like bullets and more like ripping the sky apart. Voss's canopy shook, his instruments blurred, and a bright line of tracers passed inches below his wing. "Verdammt," he cursed, pulling a sharp turn. The German fighter's engine screamed, but even that scream was nothing beside the relentless growl behind him. He saw it for the first time, then the Thunderbolt closing in, sunlight glinting off its armor, the pilot's face hidden behind glass. The spinning propeller blurred into a perfect silver disc, a halo of fury. He dove. The P-47 followed. The roar built, layer by layer, until sound became pressure. His ears popped, his vision tunneled. The world was shaking apart. For a moment, he thought the sky itself would crack. And then silence. The Thunderbolt pulled up, soaring into the light, leaving Voss spinning through the emptiness. He leveled out, gasping. His hands trembled. The radio was dead. The airfield below was burning. The sound had gone, but it left an ache like something had been taken from him. We realized, Voss would later write in Captivity, that the Americans had found a new weapon, not of fire or metal, but of fear. That engine's roar was their banner, and every time we heard it, we knew the sky no longer belonged to us. June 1943, the skies above Amiens burned. Smoke twisted like black ribbons across the dawn. Below, the airfield was chaos, trucks overturned, fuel tanks exploded, and half-melted silhouettes of planes still glowed red from the last strafing run. But the real battle raged above, where the thunder of engines clashed like the wrath of gods. Captain Erich Voss pulled his W-190 into a climb, sweat slicking his gloves. His canopy rattled, the altimeter spinning past 12,000 feet. Behind him, the world was a blur of smoke and light. Ahead, sunlight cut through the clouds, and there, glinting like silver daggers, came the Americans. 8 of them. The Thunderbolts approached in perfect formation, massive, deliberate, unstoppable. Their engines droned in a harmony that vibrated through the bones, a mechanical choir echoing across the sky. Voss's heart hammered. He'd fought Spitfires, Mustangs, Yaks. But this was different. The P-47 seconds didn't maneuver with elegance. They advanced with inevitability, like a wall of sky made flesh. "All wings break formation," he barked into the radio. "Attack head-on." The first pass came like a thunderclap. The Americans opened fire simultaneously, 8 planes, 64 Browning, 50 caliber guns. The air erupted in streaks of orange light. Each burst tore through the sky with a ripping sound, like cloth being shredded by lightning. Voss rolled hard left. Tracers sliced inches from his wingtip. One of his wingmen, Dieter, took a burst to the fuselage. A fireball bloomed where he'd been seconds earlier. "Dieter, pull out!" Static answered. The Thunderbolts didn't chase. They didn't need to. They simply rolled and came around again, like machines executing a ritual. At 18,000 feet, Voss flipped inverted, diving straight down. The G-forces crushed his chest, but adrenaline drowned out pain. Wind screamed over the canopy, the altimeter spinning like a clock gone mad. The ground rushed upward, fields, rivers, and roads blurring into streaks of green and grey. Behind him, a P-47 followed, engine roaring like an approaching storm. Voss yanked the stick, banking violently. The German fighter cut through the clouds like a blade, but the Thunderbolt stayed with him. It wasn't supposed to. Nothing that heavy should turn that tight. Yet it did. He could see it now, the nose of the American plane steady, the propeller a silver halo, the pilot calm behind the gun sight. Then came the fire. 8 Brownings roared. The sound was not sharp. It was solid, like the tearing of the world. The air between them filled with red tracers. Voss's canopy shattered. Glass rained over his face, blood mixing with oil. He pulled the stick up again, desperate, wild. His aircraft coughed smoke, engine screaming, but still alive. The Thunderbolt overshot, climbing back into the sun. For a moment, it looked like an angel rising bright, invincible, indifferent. Voss gasped for air, blood running down his neck. His left aileron was gone, controls sluggish. But instinct drove him back into the fight. Für die Heimat. For the homeland, he roared, banking toward another formation. He spotted 2 Thunderbolts attacking a German convoy below. Trains burned, trucks exploded, the earth itself split open from the hail of 50 caliber rounds. He dove. The W-190 screamed downward, guns blazing. Tracers slashed the air. 1 Thunderbolt took a hit to the wing, metal shards spinning off, but it didn't break. It absorbed the impact and rolled away, returning fire with a savage burst. Bullets ripped through Voss's right wing. 1 struck the engine. Flames leapt up the cowling. The heat seared his gloves. Warning lights flared red. He refused to bail out. The burning smell filled the cockpit. His oxygen mask melted against his cheek. Ahead, he saw the Thunderbolt he'd hit circling back not to finish him, but to watch. It was no longer a duel. It was a reckoning. He pushed the throttle forward, 1 last dive, 1 last chance. The speedometer climbed past 600 kilometers per hour, then 700. The frame groaned under the pressure. His vision darkened. The earth spun upward like a blade. At the last second, he leveled out, pulling every muscle in his arms. The F-190 skimmed the treetops, the smoke trailing behind like a black comet. The pursuing Thunderbolt dove after him, guns spitting flame. For 30 seconds, the world was pure fire. Tracers ripped the air, explosions blossomed behind him, birds scattered like shrapnel. The sound that impossible, rolling roar swallowed the sky. Then, a final hit. A burst tore through his left wing root. Metal screamed. The control stick froze. Voss's plane lurched sideways, spinning out of control. The last thing he saw was the Thunderbolt rising above him, sunlight blazing off its wings like the judgment of heaven. He pulled the eject lever. Nothing. The world turned white. When the smoke cleared, a column of flame marked where the W-190 had fallen. The Thunderbolt circled once, slowly, then turned west, vanishing into the clouds, leaving only its echo. Those who survived that day, wrote a captured Luftwaffe mechanic later, said they could still hear it in their dreams. That roar. It was not the sound of engines. It was the sound of something greater the moment the air itself changed sides. The next morning, the airfield was silent. The smell of burnt oil still lingered, and the hangars echoed with the emptiness of absence. Rows of Messerschmitts stood crippled, wings riddled with holes, engines bleeding black streaks down their sides. The Luftwaffe flag still fluttered above the command post, proud, defiant, but meaningless now. Captain Heinrich Faulkner limped across the tarmac, his uniform scorched, his eyes hollow. He had survived by luck, landing miles from the base with a broken leg and a parachute torn by fire. He was alive, but something inside him wasn't. He stopped beside the wreck of Otto Weber's aircraft. The young pilot's helmet lay half buried in the mud, its leather scorched. A fragment of metal still hissed from the engine. Faulkner crouched, pressing his hand to the cold steel. For the first time in his career, he felt small, smaller than the machine he had once worshipped. That morning, he wrote a single sentence in his flight log. "We no longer fight for victory. We fight for survival." The Luftwaffe had once been a brotherhood of arrogance. Now it was a brotherhood of ghosts. Pilots returned from missions without speaking. Some stared at the sky as if expecting thunder to fall again. Others drank until they could no longer hear the roar echoing in their heads. One mechanic described the change. Before, they walked like gods. Now, they walk like men who've seen them. Every briefing began the same way: maps, targets, altitudes, and silence. Officers pretended confidence, but even their voices trembled. No one dared mention the Thunderbolts. To say the name was to summon them. In the barracks, the talk had changed. They no longer bragged about kills or missions. They spoke of home, of wives, of mothers, of nights without the sound of engines. They counted days, not victories. The new replacements boys barely out of school arrived with shining boots and naive smiles. The veterans avoided their eyes. They had seen too many smiles vanish into smoke. Faulkner couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of fire and heard the growl of the R-2800 tearing through the sky. It wasn't just fear. It was humiliation, the knowledge that they were no longer hunters, but hunted. He had believed in the Reich, in German precision, in the idea that discipline and skill could overcome anything. But now he understood. The war had changed. It wasn't fought by aces anymore, but by factories, by nations that could outbuild, outlast, and outfly him. He looked at the black sky above and whispered, "We are no longer fighting men. We are fighting thunder." Reports came daily, more losses, fewer replacements, fuel shortages, shattered morale. The Luftwaffe command still issued orders with mechanical certainty, but the fire was gone. Even Goering's speeches, once booming with confidence, sounded hollow over the radio. By late 1943, the German pilots no longer asked, "How many did we shoot down?" They asked, "How many of us came back?" Faulkner returned to his cockpit one last time before the next sortie. He sat quietly, staring at the instrument panel. The once beautiful machine now felt like a coffin. He ran his hand over the throttle, over the bullet holes patched with dull aluminum. The metal was cold. When the siren called for takeoff, he didn't move at first. The engines around him began to start coughing, choking, roaring to life. He closed his eyes, and through that mechanical symphony, he heard it again, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The rumble from the west, the sound that had broken them. The war moved westward, and with it, the sound. By 1944, the once mighty Luftwaffe was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. The roar that had once shaken the skies over France now thundered across the Rhine, echoing through the ruins of cities it once protected. Captain Heinrich Faulkner watched from a field outside Cologne as American formations passed overhead, endless, unbroken, unstoppable. The sound was softer now, distant, fading into the clouds, but he could still feel it. It lived inside his chest like an old scar that refused to heal. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he remembered what it felt like to believe in victory, to believe that the sky belonged to them. Now, the sky belonged to whoever could fill it. That sound, he would later say, wasn't just the noise of engines. It was the sound of the world changing, of one empire falling and another awakening. The thunder of the P-47 had become more than the weapon of a nation. It was the anthem of an era, the sound of industry overpowering ideology, of production conquering pride. As the last contrails faded into twilight, the air grew still again. The silence that followed was not peace, it was surrender. And somewhere beyond the western horizon, that sound, that deep, defiant roar still rolled across the sea. The sound of steel and courage, of power and fear. The sound that ended an empire.